Um, it's such a pleasure to be here, be with you, and unfortunate not to be with you in person. Conflicts with coming trip to Mexico for an agroecology conference made that impossible, but I appreciate the flexibility to be able to present in this form, and I'm really happy to be on the panel with Kelly and Stuart on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I recently published a book called Eating Tomorrow that took me around the world and really opened my eyes to the overwhelming power agribusiness firms wield and the ways they influence aid and national policies to support their interests. It it was not exactly how I framed the book. Um, in fact, the original, it's a funny story that I didn't have a title for the book, a good title, as I was walking into the research. And I asked my good friend, Frances Moore Lepay, who's an author of Diet for a Small Planet and 18 other books. So she has a little experience coming up with good titles, to review a book proposal I had done for the book. And she agreed. We met for lunch in Cambridge, gave me great advice on the book. We didn't come up with a book title. And I'm walking home from the restaurant and my phone rings and I say, "Oh, it's Frankie. Hi, Frankie." And she said, "Tim, what about eating tomorrow?" And I promise you, I literally said, "Well, I really enjoyed our lunch, Frankie. I'd be happy to come back and do it again tomorrow if you like." And she said, "No, no, your book, the title of your book." And that's where Eating Tomorrow came from, which I'm very pleased with because it captures this idea that we're both not, we have questions about how we're going to feed the world, and we're consuming the natural resource base on which future food production depends by the way we're producing that food. But the subtitle of the book, Agribusiness, Family Farmers, and the Battle for the Future of Food, was not where I would have started, not what I expected to be saying in this book, but everywhere I went, that's what I saw. I was surprised, despite having done this kind of research for 30 years, at the ways agribusiness aggressively inserts itself from Mexico to Malawi in southeastern Africa, from Iowa to India. And so today I thought what would be helpful is if I could give you a sense of what I saw and the kind of active resistance that I saw from farmers, family farmers, to the imposition of pro-business, that kind of pro-business agenda. So let me share my screen, give you a little bit of a visual of what I'm talking about. Hopefully that is visible to you all. That's the book. But let me start in Malawi. Malawi was touted as the Green Revolution miracle because they dramatically increased corn production with the use of government subsidies. It's a small landlocked country in southeast of Africa, one of the poorest countries in the world. And the only country that tops Mexico, and I didn't expect this, in the percentage of its calories and nutrition that it gets from corn. Corn dominates the landscape, mostly on small scale farms. In an agricultural economy, again, that's dominated by smallholders, who are getting subsidized by the government with seeds and fertilizers to grow more corn. And surprisingly, again, in this tiny country, there was Monsanto. This is their little distribution center. And they'd become the largest seller of hybrid corn seeds and some other seeds in Malawi. GMOs are not allowed still, as in most African countries. But the purchases of those seeds are heavily subsidized by the government as part of its Green Revolution development program. Well, not only can farmers not really afford them without the subsidies, the yields, it turns out, are just not very good. And the technology package generally fails to pay for itself, sometimes even with the subsidies. So it's been a remarkable failure and a very costly one. But I found in my research there had actually been a very productive hybrid corn variety developed by Malawian researchers, by seed breeders there, tailored to Malawi's particular needs, the kind of grain they want. And it was getting 4 times the yield in the 90s to what Monsanto's were getting today. And I, being an inquisitive researcher, asked a government official, well, what happened to that seed? And why are you subsidizing Monsanto seed when you could be subsidizing a much more productive Malawi hybrid? And it turns out it was produced at the time and distributed by the National Seed Company of Malawi, which was a state-owned company. That was privatized in the 90s under austerity measures ordered by the International Monetary Fund. And guess who bought that seed company? Cargill initially, and then they sold it to Monsanto. And what did Monsanto do, owning this seed company, National Seed Company of Malawi, with this highly productive corn variety? They put it on the shelf. Why? So they could sell their own patented seed instead, but they couldn't compete with this national seed. So it didn't take this very productive Malawian corn variety out of production because it was unproductive. They took it out of circulation because it was productive. Remarkable. I was in Malawi a year later when a controversial seed law was being debated, and this is one of the other ways that power is being exercised very heavily by with seed laws being advocated by donor agencies, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that favors breeders' intellectual property rights over farmers' saved seeds. But this draft of this policy that was being debated in Malawi was so extreme, it really threatened to make it illegal for farmers to save, exchange, and sell their own farm-saved seeds. That, of course, is the main way food is produced in Africa. 80% of the food that's eaten in Africa is produced from farm-saved seed. So this is an extreme measure. And, you know, the kind of seeds that it was trying to outlaw are the kind this woman is holding from an agroecology project I've visited over the years. It's this very nutritious, bright orange local variety of corn, very high in vitamin A. Very successful. Didn't need fertilizer to grow well, grew intercrop with other crops. Huge success. But the law declared, this draft law, that farmers could not even call their seeds seeds. They could only call it grain. Couldn't call it seeds because it wasn't certified by the government. And it was only grain worthy of eating, but not planting. Remarkable. I talked to a farmer in the same community, and he holds up a kernel of that corn and says, how can this not be a seed? We've been growing it for generations. But that's the extreme nature of the laws that governments and donors are trying to impose. I was actually debating that seed law with one of the defenders of it, and I said to him, this law is so extreme, it could have been written by Monsanto. And I'm not lying. He looked down at his shoes, looked up and said, well, one of the authors was from Monsanto. And so you've got the companies and their representatives writing the laws that directly benefit their own companies and interests, forcing farmers to give up their saved seeds and be forced to buy these seeds. Fortunately, the revelation from that interview that Monsanto was involved kind of sent the law back to the drawing board, and it got some of the worst provisions were taken out of it. Now farmers there are fighting to get a farmers' rights bill alongside the seed bill that would guarantee the right to save and exchange seeds and sell them. But I was back again in Malawi the following year, And these same farm groups were displaying the products in a big exposition um, in the center uh, of the of the capital, Lilongwe, um, explaining and displaying some of the products. They grow a lot of different crops. They grow them intercrop, so they get great improvements in soil fertility, in nutritional diversity, many benefits. Produce a lot of different crops. These were on display in the exposition, and at their booth, they got a visit from the president of Malawi, Peter Mutharika. There he is, and talking to Evelyn Jolomole of this community. And she explained what they were doing, showed him the products, handed him a bag of the cornmeal made from this orange seed variety, orange corn variety. And she said that when she gave it to him, he said, "Is this from Monsanto?" Only thing he could think of was that the only innovation worthy of any attention would have to have come from Monsanto. She said, no, it's actually a renewable food resource right here in Malawi that produces way better than Monsanto seeds. He couldn't imagine anything else. Everywhere I went in Africa, I saw farmers resisting pro-agribusiness seed laws like this and developing their own agroecological farming. Much of that is from groups that are part of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, which is the largest civil society network in Africa, battling at the African Union for better food policies, advocating at the Climate Summit for adaptation funds that support agroecology, and working at the national level to defend farmer seed systems against the failed Green Revolution project. But agribusiness was everywhere, and actually so was Monsanto. In Mexico, I found Monsanto in the thick of the food fights over GMOs. They had, with other seed giants, won permission in the around 2009 from a sympathetic Mexican government to grow GM corn. Very controversial in Mexico because it's the birthplace of the food crop, home to a rich biodiversity that has been proven to have been contaminated in the past with floating pollen from GM corn. So they're very sensitive to protecting the integrity of that genetic base of native corn. I chronicle in my book the amazing effort of a group called Demanda Colectiva, an alliance of farm, environment, and consumer groups that put up a legal case to stop the permits in 2013, got that injunction granted, and have defended it for 10 years. That injunction has been in place for 10 years. So you want resistance to power, there you have it. And they did that thanks to tireless activism over the years. I was surprised in the course of the research that I got an interview with Monsanto in Mexico. I kind of expected my request to be met with a polite or maybe even an impolite no. But instead, I got a 5-hour interview with 6 top officials in their Mexico City high-rise office, which was absolutely surreal. Frida Kahlo would have been impressed. They had very little regard for the risk of contamination, little recognition that smallholder farmers don't want GM corn, that even the large-scale farmers kind of don't need it because they're getting yields as high as they do in Iowa without using it, without having to pay the technology fees. No matter, they tell me, Mexico needs GM corn if it's going to achieve, and these were the words they used, if they're going to achieve food sovereignty. So Monsanto's preaching to me about food sovereignty. I practically fell off my chair because, of course, food sovereignty is freedom from control of your food system by companies like Monsanto, not freedom because of them. Well, the battle goes on. The lawsuit held. and has held up till today. But the big step in 2018, Mexico elected an insurgent candidate, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who'd signed on to a radical and very inspiring set of promises demanded by farmer organizations associated with the National Farmers Alliance, Sin Maíz no hay país, without corn there is no country. And he has made good on many of those promises. He's directed subsidies to small-scale farmers, promoted agroforestry and agroecology, provided price supports for key food crops from small-scale farmers, started a grain reserve, and it has basically made food self-sufficiency and a reduction in dependence on imports from the US a top priority. But he also signed a presidential decree banning the cultivation of GM crops, GM corn, phasing out the use of the herbicide glyphosate, and prohibiting the use of GM corn in Mexico's tortillas, tamales, and other foods that rely on minimally processed corn. You may have heard about that because that drew the ire of the US, backed by Canada, which filed a formal dispute under the revamped trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And that's going on now. That'll probably be resolved in the middle of next year. The US claiming that Mexico's policies aren't based on science, and Mexico claiming that they are, and no one knows what the risks are from consuming that much minimally processed GM corn. And the Mexican government isn't backing down. It claims that it will show in this dispute that few farmers in the US sell GM corn for the tortilla market, so it has very little trade impact. We mainly sell feed corn. And it'll cite the precautionary principle, arguing that there's indeed no scientific evidence that eating large quantities of minimally processed GM corn is safe over a long period of time. That's what they do in Mexico. They eat minimally processed corn. They're right. It's inspiring to see a government so committed to defending its farmers and consumers from the overwhelming power of agribusiness and the governments they influence. They earlier stood up to these powerful companies by passing a food labeling law for unhealthy foods, high in salt, fat, and calories, sugars. Very dramatic labels, black labels on Coca-Cola and other products. And they did that over the strenuous objections and lobbying of the food and beverage industry there. So they are willing to take on power. And whatever happens in the trade dispute, you can rest assured Mexicans aren't going to let their precious tortillas be tainted with GM corn and glyphosate. It is really heartening to see NFU join with other international organizations to defend Mexico's right to food sovereignty with its support of Mexico in this dispute. And thank you all for that. Should give yourselves a round of applause for that. It means a lot in Mexico, I will tell you. They feel pretty isolated. And so it means a lot to have that kind of international support, particularly from the other North American countries that are party to the agreement. Let me end just by coming back home to the US. I think my most dramatic and sobering lesson in agribusiness power came from Iowa, which is planted in vast seas of corn and soybeans dotted with ethanol plants and factory farms. I learned from Matt Liebman here, a brilliant Iowa State agroecologist, about his efforts to reduce agriculture's heavy environmental footprint. He took me to his Marsden experimental farm, where for, I think it's 15 years, he's shown that the simple incorporation of an added crop, alfalfa for hay or grass for grazing or for cellulosic ethanol, into the standard corn-soybean rotation could have dramatic benefits. That simple act. Not a dismantling of industrial agriculture, right? That added rotation. On his experimental farm, comparing it to his control farm, They found a reduction of fertilizer use by 85%, herbicide use by 97%. They eliminated water pollution from runoff with roots in the ground. They reduced soil erosion and increased soil fertility, so yields over the long run went up. And they maintained in the course of the transition both the productivity and profitability of the farm. And I said, win, 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 right, Matt? How many farmers are using the system? And he said, relatively few. Why? I could not have devised a program that affected more of the state's agribusinesses. And the light bulb goes off in my head. It's like, of course, 85% fertilizer reduction, reduced fertilizer sales for Koch Industries and other companies. 97% drop in herbicide sales. How's Monsanto going to like that? Growing less corn and soybeans, fewer seed and herbicide sales for the seed company, lower sales for John Deere. Possible small increases in corn and soybean prices because with the rotation, you're growing a little less corn and soybeans. Higher feed costs for Tyson, Smithfield, and other factory farms. Higher corn costs for ADM and its corn ethanol plants. It was eye-opening. That's what I saw everywhere I went. If reforms or innovations put any kind of dent into agribusiness profits, they had little chance of being enacted. But I will tell you, and I'll conclude with this, I saw encouraging signs of hope everywhere I went, and that included in the US. I mean, now the Biden administration is taking a hard look at antitrust actions in data, but also in agriculture against monopolies that treat farmers and consumers unfairly. And economic power, of course, conveys political power, particularly in the US, where politics is so overrun with corporate cash. Agribusiness spends more money than the defense industry on lobbying in Washington. Think about that. And in the battle for the future of food, it's clear that these firms are the main obstacles to change. That was my conclusion from all this book research. In the US, that presents us with the daunting task of trying to get money out of politics. And that is absolutely critical to any reforms we could make. But what I learned in researching my book from farmers, from researchers all over the world, is that another food system really is possible. In diversity, there absolutely is strength. There's resilience, which is just what we need as we face our climate crises. And the solutions do lie in innovation, but it's a mistake to equate that in a simple way with technology, as Bill Gates and others generally do. The Green Revolution seed and fertilizer package is 20th century technology. That was an innovation in 1960. It's a cause of climate change, not a solution. So the real innovations that we need are in ecology and related fields where scientists work with farmers to restore and enrich the natural resource base on which future food production depends. And that way, we hope we can all be eating tomorrow. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Timothy. Hopefully you can hear the applause a little from the room here as well.